Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, conference participants, dear friends. As president of the German Association for Australian Studies, I'm very pleased to have the privilege to open the biannual conference of our organization on Australian Seascapes in Trier. It is a great pleasure and privilege for me to welcome you all to this venue. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic forced us to interrupt our regular two-year schedule and to change to an online format. But we are very fortunate to know that the Australian ambassador in Germany and the president of Trier University will address the conference participants, recognizing the status of our association and the importance of our conference topic. We feel particularly honored to receive a video message from the Australian ambassador, His Excellency Philip Green. We are very grateful for the continuous and substantive support of the Australian Embassy over the past decades. Without the support, we would not be able to carry out our work successfully. We are also very grateful to Trier University to host this event and greatly appreciate the welcome speech of Magnificenz Professor Michael Jäckel. The focus of the 17th biannual conference of the German Association for Australian Studies on Australian Seascapes is crucial for understanding Australia's cultural and national identity, as well as its political and economic agenda. The topic reconnects and resonates in productive ways with the two previous biannual conferences on the environment and on migration. The sea as a central agent in the evolution of life forms figures as an ambivalent space of possibility and danger, of alluring promises and fateful defeat in the varied history of human cultural imagination. In coastal regions of Australia, fishing has traditionally played an important role for the sustenance of indigenous peoples. The advent of the colonial invasion, however, brought about the commercialization of these activities, including the introduction of the whaling industry in the 18th century, followed by the pearling industry in the 19th century, and more recently, the development of highly profitable mining ports in conjunction with the extractive industries. Indigenous novelists such as Kim Scott and Alexis Wright have powerfully displayed the destructive effects of whaling and mining in colonial history and the lasting impact of the colonial endeavor on the current situation of indigenous peoples and of the environment. They have suggested alternative approaches to the relationship between human and non-human life forms embedded in indigenous knowledge. During the past decades, Indigenous as well as migrant writers have effectively countered the official success story of Australia as an immigrant nation by foregrounding the pre-colonial presence of Indigenous peoples on the continent and the lasting destructive effects of colonial history. They give a voice to the victims of Australia's restrictive immigration and detention policy, to the unacknowledged refugees and those who became known as boat people. Australia's coastline and the beach in particular have turned into an ambivalent space linked to images of the branding of the nation as palm-fringed Pacific dreamland and surfer's paradise, as well as to counter images of desperate refugees whose boats are not allowed to land on Australian shores. Moreover, in recent times, the coastline figures prominently as site of environmental destruction, often condensed into the image of coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef. The gradual recognition of the decisive role of colonial history in processes of environmental degradation has contributed to the belated interest in and re-evaluation of Indigenous knowledge systems and has rekindled the interest in Indigenous Pan-Pacific alliances with a new focus on archipelagic visions, which are not nostalgic, but activist. These visions, which originated in the anti-colonial movements of the 1970s and 80s in Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Hawaii, were advanced by writers who recognized the connective potential of the sea, which does not gloss over, but rather builds on the linguistic, cultural, political, social, and economic diversity of the region. As is well known, the spectrum of their voices ranges from Samoan writer Albert Wendt's call towards a new Oceania to Tongan writer Epeli Hauofa's notion of our sea of islands, and Fijian writer and critic Subramani's project of a revision of Eurocentric concepts of world literature in terms of an oceanic imaginary. Some of them included Australia in this vision, while others specifically did not. Paul Carter's use of the notion of the archipelago as starting point for a reconceptualization of Australia in 2014 in terms of relationality rather than Western anthropocentrism is expanded in his 2019 book on decolonizing governance, archipelagic thinking, in which he sees the potential of the archipelago grounded in its indeterminateness and irreducibility, but in which he also warns about the danger of the immediate elevation of the archipelago to a meta-geographical concept, which sacrifices the variety of island groupings known to exist. Highlighting the ambiguity of the term archipelago, he argues that while the term pelago suggests the freedom of open horizons, the root archi shows a predilection for unifying, sovereign, and generalizing categories. The notion of the archipelago draws attention to the multidimensional role of seascapes. As part of the history of the anthropocentric, or rather Eurocentric, colonial mapping of the Pacific region and its still lasting post-colonial and neo-colonial impact. But more importantly, the concept also foregrounds the potential of the much longer history of indigenous cultures and knowledge systems to shape the future in the context of a necessary contemporary reconceptualization of the human-non-human relationship in the face of the current global environmental crisis. During the next couple of days, we will have time to explore these issues and discuss a multitude of questions raised about Australian seascapes in keynotes and panel presentations with an inter- and transdisciplinary outlook. The program put together for this conference with so many experts in the fields of literary and media, as well as performance studies, history and art history, political science, anthropology, and geography promises a truly exciting and inspiring event. I would like to express my gratitude to the local organizer, Dr. Habil Eva Bischoff, and Professor Ursula Lehmkuhl, the Chair for International History, as well as to the supporting team, especially Anna Rudi. Special thanks for financial assistance go to Rita Volkmer, Equal Opportunities Representative of the faculty, and particularly to the German Research Foundation. Their combined efforts made the organization of this conference possible and allow us to engage in stimulating discussions, encouraging further inter- and transdisciplinary exchange and future research.